The corridor ahead was a narrow metallic throat, its walls lined with strange dim lights that pulsed erratically. The hum of the bass grew louder, filling the air with a sound like a beating heart, a low, ominous rhythm that vibrated through their bones and tightened the grip of fear around their hearts. Mira led the way, her face pale, sweat clinging to her brow as she tried to steady her breathing. Her mind swam with memories of the grotesque machines and Luis's still-warped arm, a visceral reminder of the alien technology's power and cruelty. But even as they tried to escape, the base seemed to shift around them. The walls flexed, extending and narrowing as if guiding them, forcing them deeper into its clutches. It was no longer a matter of curiosity or scientific intrigue. Now it was survival. The sense of dread was suffocating, like an invisible weight pressing down on them, tightening with each step. "Why can't we find the way out?" Grant's voice trembled, his flashlight beam jerking from wall to wall, revealing the smooth, indifferent metal surfaces stretching endlessly around them. The path they had just walked seemed to close behind them, passages twisting and sealing, disorienting their sense of direction. "Stay close," Mira whispered, her voice almost drowned by the rumbling that echoed through the corridor. She glanced back, counting the familiar faces, though each looked hollow and haunted, their expressions a mix of desperation and exhaustion. The corridor finally opened into a cavernous room, its ceiling arched high above them. Mira's light swept across the vast space, illuminating what looked like rows of glass chambers along the far wall, their opaque surfaces slick with condensation. Strange shadows danced within each chamber, blurred by layers of frost. Mira took a hesitant step forward, her gut screaming for her to turn back, but something compelled her to approach, to know the truth hiding within those glass walls. Luis, his voice still weak and hoarse from the effects of the alien machine, peered over her shoulder. "What are those? Some kind of storage pods?" "I don't know," Mira replied, though the fear in her voice was evident. The chambers loomed over them, as tall as a man and twice as wide, lined in neat rows like a grim, alien cemetery. Her hand shook as she reached up, wiping at the condensation on the closest pod, her breath fogging the glass. As the fog cleared, her light revealed a figure inside, a humanoid shape, slender and twisted, with elongated limbs folded tightly against its body. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent gray, stretched taut over impossibly thin bones. Its face was long and devoid of eyes, only a wide, gaping mouth lined with needle-thin teeth. Despite its stillness, it felt profoundly wrong, as if it were not quite dead, merely waiting. Mira staggered back, choking down a gasp, her heart pounding as she realized that each chamber held a similar creature. They were encased, preserved, as though caught in a state between life and death. "These things," Grant whispered, his voice barely audible, "they're not dead. They're dormant, like suspended in stasis." Luis backed away, clutching his mutated arm protectively, the flesh still glistening with the metallic threads that had taken root. "We need to get out of here," he said, voice tight with barely suppressed panic. "I have a bad feeling about this." But as they turned to leave, a low, vibrating pulse shook the chamber, growing in intensity, rattling the glass walls of the pods. Lights flickered on above them, bathing the room in a sickly green glow. One by one, the pods began to emit a soft hiss, the frost melting, revealing the alien creatures in stark, horrifying clarity. Their bodies twitched, limbs flexing as if awakening from an endless slumber. "No, no, no," Caroline stammered, backing away, her eyes wide with horror. The creature's eyes snapped open, the glass cracking under the force of their movement. Their gaze was empty, void-like, but filled with a malice that was palpable. They moved with an eerie, unnatural grace, long fingers scraping against the glass as they broke free from their prisons. The team broke into a run, but the creatures moved faster, leaping from the shattered pods with an inhuman agility. Their limbs stretched and elongated, pulling them forward in jerky, unnatural strides. One creature dropped from the wall, its body twisting and bending as it gave chase, filling the cavernous room with a clicking, chittering sound that grated against their nerves. "Keep moving," Mira yelled, her voice echoing as they sprinted toward a narrow corridor. The walls seemed to close in around them, guiding them deeper into the base, forcing them through tight, twisting passages with no sense of direction or escape. Mira could hear Caroline's breath hitch beside her, panicked and erratic. The creatures pursued them, their movements a grotesque blend of insect and humanoid, limbs bending at angles that no bone should allow. One of them scuttled up the wall, moving above them, its thin fingers stretching down as it tried to grab at Caroline's shoulder. "Get off me!" she screamed, twisting free just as Grant pulled her away. The creature's fingers grazed her arm, leaving faint, burning lines on her skin that sizzled and festered. Their flashlights flickered, and in the dim light, Mira saw one of the creatures fully, its mouth stretched open, rows of needle-like teeth lining the inside, its flesh writhing as if filled with parasites. It let out a shrill, keening sound that resonated painfully in their ears, triggering a flood of nausea and dizziness. As they ran, the corridor twisted again, leading them into another room, this one lined with towering, dark consoles. Alien symbols flared to life as they entered, responding to their presence. Mira's eyes darted around the room, searching for any means of escape, but all she saw were more machines, consoles, screens, and eerie displays of the alien civilization's knowledge. Luis collapsed against a console, clutching his chest, his breathing labored. His skin had taken on a sickly pallor, the metallic veins spreading across his arm and up his neck. I can't go on," he gasped, the pain etched into every word. "We have to keep moving," Mira insisted, but she knew that Luis was weakening. His eyes were unfocused and his movements were sluggish, the alien infection spreading through his system like a venomous poison. In the silence that followed, they heard the creatures approaching, the scraping of their elongated limbs against the metallic floors. Mira's heart hammered in her chest as she scanned the room for anything that could buy them time. "There has to be something here, something that can stop them," she said, her voice tense with desperation. Grant's flashlight fell on a large central console, one that seemed different from the rest. Its symbols were arranged in a spiral, pulsing in a rhythmic pattern. Mira's instincts told her that this console held some kind of control over the base, perhaps even over the creatures themselves. With trembling hands, she reached for the panel, pressing one of the symbols. The room shuddered and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. The lights brightened and the walls began to shift, rearranging themselves as if responding to her touch. For a moment, the creatures paused, their heads snapping toward the console, their empty eyes filling with something akin to recognition and rage. But the respite was brief. The creatures resumed their pursuit with renewed vigor, more relentless than before. Mira realized with dawning horror that activating the console hadn't stopped them. It had only angered them. The base itself seemed to pulse with their fury, as if the very walls were complicit in their hunt. "We have to run," Caroline shouted, grabbing Mira's arm and pulling her away from the console. They dashed through another corridor, twisting and turning, each step echoing as the creatures closed in. Mira's breath came in gasps, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the base's layout. It felt like they were running in circles, caught in a nightmare that had no end. Just as hope seemed to slip away, they burst into a vast chamber, a stark, circular room with a domed ceiling covered in symbols. At its center stood a colossal machine, its surface gleaming, veins of liquid light pulsing along its length. Mira felt an intense pull toward it, an instinct that this machine was the heart of the base, the source of its power and, perhaps, its only weakness. The creatures hesitated at the chamber's entrance, their heads tilted as if assessing the room. Mira realized that the machine's hum affected them, its resonance causing their limbs to twitch and convulse. "It's hurting them," she whispered, a spark of hope flaring in her chest. She glanced back at her team, the desperation mirrored in each of their faces. "If we can activate this, maybe we can end this." Grant, breathing heavily, nodded. "What do we have to lose?" Together they approached the machine, searching for any sign of a control mechanism. Mira's fingers brushed across a series of symbols, and the machine shuddered, a blinding light pouring from its core. The creatures shrieked, their bodies writhing as they clawed at the walls, their limbs jerking in painful spasms. Mira watched in horrified awe as the light intensified, filling the room with an energy so powerful it felt like her skin was peeling away. The creatures began to disintegrate, their forms dissolving into shadows, their screams fading into the hum of the machine. The base itself seemed to scream, the walls vibrating as if in agony. Finally, the light dimmed, and the chamber fell silent. The creatures were gone, reduced to ashes scattered across the floor. Mira collapsed to her knees, exhausted, her heart still racing as she looked around at the aftermath. They had survived, but the base was still alive, still watching, still waiting. In that moment, she realized their struggle was far from over. They had awakened something ancient and monstrous, and though they had survived this encounter, a sense of impending doom lingered in the air, reminding them that the worst was yet to come. The chamber was silent, save for the faint hum of the colossal machine that dominated its center. Mira's heart pounded in her chest, her breaths shallow as she stared at the towering, gleaming structure. Faint pulses of light rippled across its surface, like veins in some enormous creature. Her mind was a haze of exhaustion and fear, but she couldn't pull her gaze away. This machine, this monstrous heart of the base, held the answer they had been searching for. Around her, the others struggled to their feet, faces pale and hollow-eyed. Grant cradled his arm, bruised from a near miss with one of the creature's claws, while Caroline leaned against a wall, clutching her chest, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. Luis was the worst off. The metallic infection had spread up his arm and across half his face, dark veins twisting under his skin, giving him a haunted, otherworldly appearance. Mira felt a pang of sorrow as she looked at them. They had come so far, survived so much, only to end up here, at the mercy of an alien machine they barely understood. But now, finally, they had reached the core of the base, the last chamber, where she knew the answers waited. Slowly, she turned to the console, its symbols shifting and morphing as if alive, reflecting a language her mind could barely comprehend. Yet, as she stared, fragments of meaning surfaced, piecing together a dark history. "It's a record," she murmured, tracing her fingers over the symbols. "An archive of everything that happened here." Grant looked over her shoulder, his face drawn with fear and exhaustion. "What do you mean? Can you understand it?" She nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the truth settle over her like a leaden shroud. "This base wasn't just a refuge," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was a warning. These aliens, they came here to escape something. But what they were trying to escape, they brought it with them." Caroline staggered forward, her eyes wide with horror. "Are you saying that those things, those creatures, they weren't supposed to be here?" Mira shook her head. "Number, they were once like us, intelligent, curious, a thriving civilization. But they went too far. They created technology that allowed them to manipulate life, to reshape entire worlds, to control time itself." Her voice wavered as she continued, her gaze locked on the alien symbols. "And in their pursuit of power, they corrupted themselves. Their technology twisted their bodies, warped their minds. They became monsters, infected by the very machines they created." Luis staggered, his infected arm twitching as if in response to her words. He grimaced, clutching his head. "Are you saying we're infected? That this place is contagious?" Mira's heart clenched as she looked at him, seeing the faint gleam of metallic veins crawling beneath his skin. She didn't want to say it, but she knew it was true. The base was alive in a way they hadn't understood. It was a parasite, feeding off them, reshaping them, drawing them into its alien ecosystem. "It's not just the technology," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's the base itself. It's sentient. It's aware of us. And it's been trying to turn us into them." Grant's face twisted in horror, his eyes flicking to the walls as if he could see the base breathing around him. "We need to leave," he said, his voice breaking. "We need to get out of here. Now." But even as he spoke, the chamber began to shift, the walls sliding and twisting, sealing off the exit. They were trapped. The base was reacting, closing in around them, its hum deepening into a low, resonant pulse that vibrated through their bones. Mira could feel it, a primal, malignant intelligence pressing in on them like a predator closing in for the kill. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice barely steady as she gripped her flashlight, her gaze darting around the room. "There has to be a way out." Her eyes fell on a small, almost hidden console at the base of the machine, its symbols flickering faintly. It was different from the others, simpler, almost rudimentary. The words that formed on its surface struck her like a physical blow. "Emergency protocol, final cycle initiation." Mira's heart pounded as the meaning of the words sank in. This wasn't an escape route. It was a last resort, a fail-safe designed to shut down the base, permanently. But the cost? She didn't need to read further to understand. Activating it would trigger a chain reaction, collapsing the entire structure, burying them and everything in it. "We can destroy it," she whispered, turning to the others. "We can end this, seal it off forever. But we won't make it out." The silence that followed was suffocating. The others looked at her, their faces etched with exhaustion, fear, and a grim shared understanding. They had come this far, fought through unimaginable horrors, but they knew deep down that they couldn't let this alien corruption reach the surface. Luis, clutching his mutated arm, managed a faint, bitter smile. If it means this infection dies with us, then it's worth it. Grant nodded, his face pale but resolute. We can't let this thing live, not after what we've seen. Mira's heart twisted as she looked at them, at the silent determination in their eyes. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and pressed the final symbol. A low rumble filled the chamber, the walls vibrating as the base reacted. The console flickered, the symbol shifting to a countdown. 10, 9, 8. Go, Mira said, her voice choked. Get to the edge of the chamber. It might give us a chance. They ran, staggering across the room, their legs heavy with exhaustion. The base began to shake, a deep, grinding noise echoing through the corridors, as if the structure itself were protesting, resisting its own destruction. The lights flickered, dimmed, then burst into blinding brilliance, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted. Mira felt the ground shudder beneath her feet, and she stumbled, barely catching herself. The countdown continued, each second echoing like a drumbeat in her mind. 5, 4, 3. A roar filled the chamber, the sound of metal twisting and tearing, as if the base were being ripped apart from the inside. The walls cracked, and Mira caught a glimpse of something vast and monstrous, shifting in the darkness, a writhing mass of tendrils and eyes, twisted remnants of the alien civilization fused into the walls and floors, a living nightmare embedded within the base itself. The base wasn't just sentient, it was alive. A twisted amalgamation of alien biology and technology, a parasite that had devoured its creators and would do the same to them. 2, 1. The machine at the center of the chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light, and Mira felt herself pulled backward, as if the air itself were collapsing around her. She reached out, grabbing onto something solid, her fingers digging into the cold metal as the ground vanished beneath her feet. The last thing she saw was the faces of her team, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and relief, as the light engulfed them, swallowing them whole. When Mira opened her eyes, she was lying on cold, hard ground. Her body ached, her vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she was still in the base, trapped in the nightmare. But as her vision cleared, she saw the faint glow of dawn breaking over the horizon, casting a pale light over the desolate landscape. She was outside. Somehow she had made it out. She struggled to sit up, her heart pounding as she looked around. The others were there, scattered across the ground, bruised and battered, but alive. Caroline stirred beside her, blinking in confusion, and Luis sat up slowly, his infected arm now a lifeless gray, the infection frozen, stopped in its tracks. They had survived. Mira felt a wave of relief wash over her, a sob rising in her throat. But even as she took in the sight of the empty landscape, the cold air filling her lungs, a feeling of unease crept over her. In the distance, a faint light glimmered, hovering in the early morning mist. It was small, almost imperceptible, like a distant star, pulsing with a familiar rhythm. Mira's heart skipped a beat as she realized what it was. A signal, a final pulse from the base, sent out into the void. They had destroyed the base, but they hadn't silenced it. It had sent a message, a call, echoing across the stars to something or someone. Whatever it was, it would know that Earth had found the base, had meddled with its secrets. Mira felt a chill settle over her as she looked at her team, their faces etched with the same dawning realization. They had escaped, but they hadn't stopped the threat. The base's message was out there now, a beacon that would draw the attention of whatever ancient forces had created it. In that moment, Mira understood that their discovery had not ended the danger. It had only begun it. Somewhere out there in the vast expanse of space, something had heard their call. And it was coming. The dawn broke fully over the horizon, casting long shadows over the empty landscape. And in the silence, Mira knew that they were no longer alone.